thank you to everyone who participated in the Breeding Stock Valuation Survey. Ontario sheep farmers will be compiling the data to group the breeding stock values by breed types, ages, and other criteria that will help the government better understand the current values of commercial breeding stock. Also, thank you to producers who shared purebred breeding stock values. We will compare the values in the survey with the current program valuation methods and work with our colleagues at the Purebred Sheep Breeders of Ontario and the Canadian Sheep Breeders Association to determine the best way forward. The next step is for OSF's Predation and Wildlife Committee to meet and discuss the results of the survey in order to make a recommendation to the board on the breeding stock values OSF will share with the ministry. Now let's get into today's episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Flock Talk. I'm Erin Morgan, and I work for the members of the Ontario Sheep Farmers. Today, I'm pleased to welcome Lisa Bishop-Spencer to the podcast. Lisa is the Executive Director of the Canadian Centre for Food Integrity, a not-for-profit charitable organization whose members and partners represent the diversity of today's food system. Lisa has 20 years of experience in strategic communications, public relations, and brand management within the food industry, including a role with the Chicken Farmers of Canada. So thanks for joining me today, Lisa. Appreciate you joining us on Flock Talk.
Thanks for having me.
So can you get started and tell us a little bit more about yourself and the Canadian Centre for Food Integrity? Who are the members? What kind of work do you do for the ag industry?
Terrific. So the Canadian Centre for Food Integrity, or CCFI, is a nonprofit charitable organization that helps Canadians learn to trust Canada's food system. So we help Canada's food system earn trust. Our members span the entire full value chain, including farmers and processors, retailers, food service, input suppliers, researchers, and more. I like to say that we work at the intersection of the food system and the public. We focus on two-way communications. Through the research and initiatives that we do, we bring information in from Canadians, which helps the sector understand public expectations and concerns and values. And then we help the sector communicate out, providing tools and strategies and support to foster more transparent and more meaningful engagement with the public.
Really interesting. So, going through some of the work that your organization does, I see that you do some public trust research reports. So how do you track Canadians' perceptions of the food and agricultural industries over time?
Yeah, ever since 2016, we've been conducting national public trust research. It's one of the most comprehensive studies in Canada focused on food and agriculture. So we survey thousands of Canadians annually with responses collected from every province. We oversample, in fact, in an effort to ensure a representative and regionally balanced sample that reflects the diversity of the opinion across the country. The research that we do explores a wide range of topics from food safety, affordability, animal welfare, sustainability, environmental concerns, and trust in various parts of the food system. So that lets us not only track how perceptions are shifting year over year, but identify emerging issues and some of those deeper trust dynamics. We were supported by a research advisory committee made up of experts from academia and industry and other nonprofit organizations, and they help ensure that our methodology is rigorous and our questions are relevant and that we're interpreting the results with integrity and clarity. So coming out of that, it's a robust, evidence-based tool that gives the food system real insight on how Canadians think and feel about their food and how to respond to those feelings in a meaningful way.
Amazing. So can you tell me a little bit more about that? What have you seen from the survey, and how have Canadian perceptions changed over the lifespan of the survey?
Yeah. So when we look back to 2016, trust in the Canadian food system and in agriculture more broadly was remarkably stable. So for years, it held steady. But that stability was also a bit of a warning sign to us. It was steady, but stagnant. It told us that Canadians weren't losing trust, but the sector wasn't making any gains either. And trust wasn't deepening in a real meaningful way. we're seeing a change there. So over the last couple of years, we've seen a softening in that trust, particularly among younger generations and urban Canadians. They're not rejecting the food system by any means, but they're asking different kinds of questions. They don't just want to know what's happening in food production, but why is it happening? They want to see the values that they can relate to, like environmental responsibility, animal welfare, social fairness. They want to see all of that reflected in the food system. What's really interesting for me is that many Canadians, especially those under the age of 40, trust isn't built on tradition or familiarity anymore. It's built on alignments and people wanting to be aligned on values and expectations. So the sector can't just rely on goodwill or nostalgia anymore. It has to be more transparent, more accessible, and more proactive. The other thing we've noticed is that trust is becoming a little bit more fragile. And it's more reactive to outside forces, whether it's what we call fearfluencing, price inflation, global instability. It makes it even more important for us to continuously engage with the public and not just when there's a crisis or a controversy. I'm just going to give you another interesting stat. Of the 38.5 million people in Canada who are online right now talking about anything, only about 1.5 million are actively engaging in conversations about food and food production online. That's a shockingly small number. And it means that the vast majority of Canadians aren't talking about the food system at all. But it's also an opportunity because of those 1.5 million who are talking about us, 81% say that they trust the food system. That's huge. It shows that when people are engaged, they're more likely to trust. So that's the challenge and our responsibility to grow that conversation, right? When we show up with credible, values-based stories, the more trust can grow out of those stories and reach a broader audience.
So when you talk about people who are online and talking about food, have you removed kind of that like recipe development, like recipe sharing from that statistic, or does that include? Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, it doesn't include the people who are posting the meals that they ate on Instagram or anything.
Right.
People who are actively engaged in conversation about food. Right.
Yeah, because I see those all the time.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just my feed. Little insight into what I look at. Awesome. So were there any other sort of surprising findings in 2024 or the last couple of years that stood out to you? Maybe trends going in the right direction, the wrong direction?
Yeah, I mean, 2024 was a real inflection point in the data. For the first time in so many years where we'd been sort of holding steady in that line, we saw a decline in public trust across key areas of the food system. One of the most striking statistics is that only 36% felt that the food system was heading in the right direction, which was down from 41% the year before. And that's a real drop in public confidence. We also saw fewer Canadians holding positive perceptions of the food system overall. People were more likely to say that they feel confused or skeptical or unsure of who to believe. And that kind of uncertainty really erodes trust over time. It wasn't tied to any single issue. It was taken, the survey was taken last summer, and we were in the middle of a general pessimism about politics, about everything. So, affordability pressures, digital misinformation, and broader societal fatigue were really playing in there. But it's not all bad news. When we compare agriculture to other sectors, it still ranks the highest in public trust. In fact, primary agriculture continues to outperform many parts of the food system and most other sectors in general when it comes to perceptions of things like honesty and care and contribution to society. So we can build on that strength. And the other interesting positive shift that we've observed since the research was completed is the fact that there are now tariff threats and anti-Canadian rhetoric coming from the US. And as a direct result of that, Canadians are now expressing a renewed sense of pride and urgency around supporting Canadian grown and Canadian made food. And that opens the door for us to have a renewed dialogue with people, one that's not about defending trust, but about deepening it through shared values and pride and purpose.
That's awesome. So when you look at the data, can you tease out sort of the difference between the food system, more broad, and farmers themselves?
Yes.
Like, is there some information that would talk about whether farmers themselves are trustworthy? And, and like, can you get some general like feelings about how farmers are perceived by the public?
Yeah, we can. So what we do know is that farmers are still the most trusted voices in the food system, especially when you compare it to institutions like government or media or large corporations, right? So it's important to be strong, to be clear about that, though, because that trust, while it's relatively strong, is still not overwhelmingly high, and it's starting to show signs of decline. So fewer than half of Canadians, typically 40 to 50%, say they fully trust farmers to do the right thing for the public. So while farmers continue to rank ahead of others, the trust isn't as deep as a lot of people assume. What we're seeing is a softening, especially among, again, younger Canadians and more urban Canadians. And it's not active distrust, it's more of a disconnect. It's a growing distance between people and their food and where it comes from. Fewer people have direct connections to farms now. There's limited understanding about how farming works. And that creates kind of space for uncertainty and skepticism or even misinformation to take hold. So I think what we can take away from that is that while that trust exists, is a really valuable asset, but we can't just rest on those laurels, right? We have to actively reinforce through the transparency and the visibility and the conversations, again, that reflect the shared values that we have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's transition from talking about the report to what you do with the information that you gather from the report. Do you have campaigns to change people's minds, to address questions and concerns? Like how do you use the information that you gather?
So the research we do is not just a reporting exercise, it's a foundation for us to act on, right? We use it to help the sector understand what Canadians are thinking and feeling and questioning when it comes to their food. And then we help translate that into strategies that build trust. One of our biggest tools that we're developing right now for turning that insight into action is the Public Awareness Initiative. And this is what we're calling Canada's food system, Our Food, Our Future. It's a sector-wide effort to try to build trust by sharing those real stories behind Canada's food system in a unified, emotionally resonant way. And it's, again, cross-sectoral and there are lots of organizations that are feeding into this, and it's meant to amplify those organizations that are doing some really hard work, like Farm and Food Care Ontario and Canadian Food Focus. And we're really trying to ground ourselves in what the research tells us Canadians care about most. Mm-hmm. But another key piece of this work is addressing the rise of what we call fearfluencing, right? Which is the use of fear-based narratives, whether it's from social media or activist-driven messaging, to kind of shape consumer perception and either deliberately or indirectly erode confidence in food production. So this is one of the biggest threats that we believe public trust has today. And we're making that the central focus of our Public Trust Summit, which is an event that we hold every October, where we bring the sector together, kind of dig deeper into those emerging trust issues. And this year, we're going to tackle how fear is being used to mislead and how it spreads and how the food system can respond with transparency and empathy and credible values-based communication. So whether it's through campaigns or convening or direct support to the members, we use that research to ensure that what goes out to the public is informed by what's coming in from the public. And we're always trying to be ready to respond to the issues that matter to people.
So, building on that, we talked about farmers having the trust of the public. Mm-hmm. How can individual farmers support the work that you're doing and other groups are doing to build trust with the public? Is there something that they can do specifically, or maybe not do, when they're doing their social media and even just talking to family and friends in their communities?
Absolutely. So the best thing that a farmer can do is be visible and authentic. You don't need to be a communications expert or to go viral online, but showing up and sharing your story and being open to what happens on your farm can go a long way in building that trust. People trust people. And when they see the care and pride that you take into your work, it can help close the gap between farm and fork, right? So The other important thing is not to be defensive. It's so easy to head into that natural reaction when you're being exposed to criticism or, more importantly, misinformation, either from people who don't know any better, who are just saying ridiculous things like, I don't like chemicals in my food, or, you know what I mean, or things, or people who are deliberately trying to disrupt the system, like activists, right? It's a natural reaction to be defensive. But the most effective communication is sort of calm, honest, and values-based. People don't expect perfection. They expect integrity. They expect accountability and a willingness to engage. The other thing is interesting is about innovation. Innovation is the one thing that sort of unites the entire food sector. We're all innovating because we have to, but also because it really provides us with an opportunity to make our businesses better, to deliver better things for everyone. And when it comes to innovation, people frequently will go, here's all this high-tech equipment I have, or here's all this wonderful stuff I use, or and they'll portray it as sort of being cutting-edge technology. And when it comes to innovation in healthcare, people get really excited. But when it comes to innovation in food, people get very nervous.
Okay.
Right? So what's interesting about that, because in healthcare, it's terrific. You know, the more stainless steel, the more cutting edge, the better. But when it comes to food, people are like, whoa, what are you doing to my food? Or you're just doing this to make money. And it's not about that. And so when we talk about innovation, when we talk about that kind of message that we want to get out to people, our research shows us that if we frame it in terms of outcomes, what it means to them, the consumer, that's when people lock in and understand. So, how do we hang on to the values behind the little red barn and the little green tractor and show people that we can do more with an acre of land than we ever could, or that we're feeding 400 million people around the world? And that comes into saying, we have these values, and our values are what drive us to keep being better. And we talk about people wanting to hear about it in terms of outcome. The result of all of our innovation is that you have more choice at the grocery store, or that there's an affordable option for you at the grocery store. So if we talk about it in terms of those, what it means to people, what it means for the environment, what it means for affordability, that really builds that connection and confidence.
Okay, amazing advice. Because a lot of our producers do share snippets of their day on social media, and that's really helpful because I'm sure they hear from the public from time to time in their comments. So that's very helpful. And then, looking at the broader agricultural sector in Canada, our commodity organizations have been having conversations around, with everything that's going on with talks of tariffs and sovereignty and all these conversations that have been happening, especially around the election. Some of the commodity organizations are saying that the government and national organizations should be doing more to promote produced or made in Canada products through labeling, through advertising. Is there an opportunity? Does your organization see this opportunity as well?
Yes, but this is absolutely an opportunity. It's one that we've been actively engaging with. The current conversations around tariff and that sovereignty discussion that's happening has opened the door really for a much deeper public dialogue about the value of a strong, resilient Canadian food system. And we're seeing a clear rise in national pride and interest in Canadian grown, Canadian made food. But it's important to understand that this isn't just as simple as choosing a product with Product of Canada label. Our food system is incredibly integrated and interconnected, and many products that don't carry that label still support Canadian farmers and processors and retailers and workers. For example, a product might use Canadian ingredients, but be processed across the border because of specialization or scale. That doesn't mean it isn't contributing to Canada's economy or aligned with Canadian standards. So one of the things we've been focusing on is helping consumers understand that complexity without undermining their confidence. It's about transparency, showing how the food system works. You hear things about trying to boycott this fast food brand, for instance, right? When that fast food brand, all of its meat comes from Canada, all of its potatoes come from Canada, and all of its employees are Canadian. So a boycott of that brand doesn't really send the signal, and in fact could ultimately hurt the Canadian economy. So we want to make sure that people understand how the system works and what those labels mean. They should absolutely try to commit to Canadian made and Canadian product wherever they can, but just understand that it's not a straight line, it's a web. And we're trying to, through the public awareness initiative, that's a big part of that. We're not just helping people feel pride in their food system, but deepen their understanding of how it functions, how it supports Canadians, and how their food choices connect to a much broader story.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you. And as we finish off, I like to go really broad with the where are we going? As a food industry, where's your organization going over the long term? So where are the big opportunities that you see where you're really making an investment as an organization for the long term to improve trust in the Canadian food system?
Right. We see a huge opportunity to elevate Canada's food system in the national conversation. We want to move it from something that people take for granted to something that they actively value and support, like they do the healthcare system and the education system. So our long-term investment is focused in two key areas: public trust research and the public awareness initiative, that Canada's Food System Initiative. The research is how we stay connected to how Canadians are thinking and feeling, and it provides sort of that evidence base for everything else we do. The public awareness initiative turns that insight into impact and builds that shared platform for the entire food system to tell its story with that unity, emotion, and relevance. But we also see a major opportunity on the policy front. And we don't lobby, but for too long, we know that the food system has been viewed through this quaint, nostalgic lens, right? The red barn, the green tractor, that pastoral ideal. And while that imagery connects with people emotionally, it doesn't reflect the scale, the complexity, and the innovation that's happening. So we need to walk that line between maintaining the values that Canadians hold dear, like animal care and stewardship and integrity, while showing that it's modern and evolving and leading. Our system is an economic powerhouse. It's an employment powerhouse, and it deserves to be treated that way. That means being recognized by decision makers beyond agriculture as well, because too often when policies are being developed, whether they're in trade or health or the environment or labor, that has a major impact on the food system, but the sector isn't being consulted at all. Mm-hmm. So we need to be at the table. That has to change. Building public trust is part of the solution, but so is building policy awareness, ensuring that we have a seat at the table, not just in ag-specific conversations, but wherever major decisions are made that affect how we feed Canadians. So that's where we're going, and that's what we see the opportunity is ahead.
That's amazing. I do like the idea of elevating the agricultural sector to the level of the healthcare sector, because we're intertwined, very much so.
Absolutely. We need to be recognized as the economic and employment powerhouse that we are. We're the fourth largest exporters in Canada. We're responsible for 1 in 9 jobs in Canada, and yet we're still kind of being treated as point, and that time has to come to an end.
Right on. Well, that's a really great place to end, because yes, that time really does have to come to an end. And I hope that the producers listening to this got some value out of the suggestions for social media and for sort of elevating that conversation. And so thanks very much, Lisa. Appreciate you joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of Flock Talk, please subscribe through your podcast app to receive alerts for our future episodes. And please share our podcast with your friends. For more Ontario Sheep Farmers content, follow us on social media at Ontario Sheep Farmers on Instagram and Facebook, at Ontario Sheep on X, and visit our website at ontariosheep.org.